Hello friends, how are you? Welcome to Ancient Coin World US. Welcome back to Ancient Coin World US. If you love American coins, hidden treasures, fascinating history, and the possibility of finding something special in your everyday pocket change, you've come to the right place. Today we're diving into the exciting world of Washington quarter dollars, examining several dates and mint marks that collectors pay close attention to. 1979D, 1981D, 1983P, and 1984D. These coins may look ordinary at first glance, but their condition, minting characteristics, varieties, errors, and collector demand can make an enormous difference in their desirability. So grab your magnifying glass, because we're about to take a closer look at some Washington quarters that you might want to think twice about before spending. The Washington quarter is one of America's most recognizable coins, carrying the portrait of George Washington on the obverse and historically featuring an eagle on the reverse before the designs of the modern quarter programs. For generations, these quarters have passed through millions of hands, traveled across the country, and quietly become part of American daily life. But beneath their familiar appearance is a fascinating story of American coin production. The dates we're discussing today come from an important period in modern US coinage, and collectors examine them for everything from exceptional condition to unusual minting errors. Before we go any further, there is one important fact every collector should know. The 1979D, 1981D, 1983P, and 1984D Washington quarters are not automatically silver coins simply because they are old. Regular circulation quarters from these dates were generally struck in the standard copper-nickel clad composition, not the 90% silver composition used by earlier Washington quarters. Special collector versions and unusual errors are a different matter, which is why identification is so important. Never assume that an ordinary quarter is silver just because of its age, color, or appearance. And this is where today's story becomes especially interesting. A quarter that has been sitting in a drawer for decades might look dark, dirty, scratched, or strangely colored, but those characteristics alone don't determine whether it has collector value. Collectors look at the date, mint mark, condition, strike, surface quality, color, errors, and variety before reaching a conclusion. A coin with a genuine minting error can be considerably more interesting than a normal example, while a common coin in exceptionally high-grade condition can also attract serious collector attention. So what exactly should you look for? Start with the mint mark. The letter D indicates the Denver Mint, while P indicates the Philadelphia Mint. A quarter without a mint mark can also be perfectly normal depending on the year and minting facility. These tiny letters can tell us where a coin was produced, and for collectors, that information is an essential part of identifying a particular issue. That's why a small letter beneath the date can sometimes make a major difference when comparing coins. Another important factor is condition. Imagine two quarters with exactly the same date and mint mark. One has spent decades circulating through vending machines, cash registers, and pockets, with scratches and worn details covering the surfaces. The other has been carefully stored since the day it was produced, retaining brilliant luster and crisp details. Even though both coins have the same date, their collector appeal can be dramatically different. This is why professional grading and careful preservation are so important in the world of numismatics. The 1979D Washington quarter is our first date of interest. Millions of quarters were produced during this era, so an ordinary circulated 1979D quarter is not automatically rare. However, collectors may pay closer attention to particularly well-preserved examples and coins showing legitimate mint errors or unusual varieties. The challenge is distinguishing an actual minting error from ordinary damage that occurred after the coin left the mint. Scratches, dents, chemical discoloration, and machine damage can sometimes look dramatic, but they generally do not carry the same collector significance as a genuine mint error. Then we have the 1981D Washington quarter, another coin that can attract attention when found in exceptional condition. By this period, most quarters were intended for everyday commerce, meaning many examples quickly became worn and scratched. High-grade survivors can therefore be more interesting to collectors than heavily circulated examples. If you discover an unusually sharp 1981D quarter with strong luster and very few contact marks, don't immediately throw it back into circulation. Take a closer look and consider having it professionally evaluated if it appears exceptional. Next comes the 1983P Washington quarter, a particularly interesting issue for collectors because high-grade examples can be much more desirable than ordinary circulated pieces. The Philadelphia Mint Mark P can be found on the obverse, and collectors examining these coins often pay close attention to preservation, surface marks, luster, and strike quality. Remember, however, that simply finding a 1983P quarter does not mean you've discovered a fortune. The coin must have characteristics that actually separate it from the enormous number of ordinary examples. Finally, we have the 1984 D Washington quarter, another coin worth examining carefully when you encounter one in unusually good condition. Look closely at Washington's portrait, the lettering, the rim, and the fields surrounding the design. On the reverse, inspect the eagle and lettering for unusual doubling, die characteristics, or other features. A genuine mint error can be fascinating, but it should be authenticated before making an extraordinary value claim. In the coin world, excitement is important, but accurate identification is even more important. Now let's talk about something that catches everyone's attention: different color shades. You might discover a quarter that looks golden, brownish, gray, reddish, or even slightly rainbow-colored. But color by itself does not prove that a quarter is rare or made from silver. Environmental exposure, storage conditions, oxidation, chemicals, and other factors can change the appearance of a coin over time. Collectors distinguish between natural tunning and damage, and a strange color should always be investigated rather than immediately treated as evidence of rarity. And what about that dirty quarter hiding in an old jar? This is where many people make a serious mistake. They find an old coin, see dirt and discoloration, and immediately reach for a cleaning solution or polishing cloth. Don't do it if you suspect the coin could be collectible. Cleaning can leave scratches and unnatural surfaces that may permanently reduce the coin's appeal. A coin that looks unattractive to the average person may actually be more desirable to a collector if its original surface remains untouched. The same warning applies to polishing. Never assume that making a coin shiny will make it more valuable. Collectors generally prefer original surfaces, and harsh cleaning can destroy the characteristics they are trying to preserve. If you believe you found an unusual quarter, handle it carefully by its edges and keep it in a safe holder rather than rubbing the surfaces with your fingers. Now comes the exciting question: could one of these ordinary-looking quarters really be worth thousands of dollars? In exceptional circumstances, a coin can become valuable because of a rare error, extraordinary grade, or unusual variety. But we should be careful with internet claims suggesting that every 1979D, 1981D, 1983P, or 1984D quarter is worth thousands or millions. Most examples are not. The real treasure is finding the specific characteristics that make one coin different from the millions of ordinary examples. This is exactly why coin collecting is so much more than simply looking at the date. It is a process of investigation. You become a detective, studying the tiny details that most people never notice. You compare one coin with another, learn about minting processes, examine photographs of authenticated varieties, and gradually develop an eye for unusual characteristics. The more you learn, the easier it becomes to separate genuine collectible coins from ordinary pocket change. And here's another fascinating point. Sometimes the most exciting discovery isn't a valuable coin at all. It can be the story behind the coin. A quarter from the late 1970s or early 1980s represents a different era of American life. It may have been produced before the internet became part of everyday life, before smartphones existed, and before many of today's technologies were even imagined. That tiny piece of metal may have traveled through an extraordinary number of hands before finally ending up in your collection. For collectors and investors, however, research is essential. Don't purchase an expensive coin simply because someone calls it ultra rare. Look for evidence. Ask whether the coin has been professionally graded, whether the supposed error is recognized by specialists, and whether comparable examples have actually sold for the claimed amount. A dramatic asking price is not necessarily the same thing as a genuine market value. So if you have a 1979D, 1981D, 1983P, or 1984D Washington quarter, take it out of your change jar and give it a careful examination. Look at the date, locate the mint mark, inspect the rim, study both sides under good lighting, and search for characteristics that appear genuinely unusual. If the coin is in exceptional condition or appears to have a legitimate mint error, consider having it examined by a reputable numismatist or professional grading service. And remember, silver identification requires more than looking at color. Regular quarters from these dates were generally copper-nickel clad, so don't mistake tarnishing, tunning, or unusual lighting for silver composition. If you believe you have a special silver issue, composition should be verified rather than guessed. A proper examination can tell you far more than a photograph or an online rumor. The real excitement of Ancient Coin World US is discovering the stories hiding behind America's coins. From the historic Washington design to the tiny D and P mint marks, every detail can tell us something. Some coins are valuable because of their condition, others because of errors, and many are valuable simply because they preserve an important piece of American history. The key is knowing what you're looking at. So before you spend that old Washington quarter, stop, look, and investigate. You may not have $1 million treasure, and most people won't, but you could have a coin with an unusual characteristic that deserves a closer look. The difference between an ordinary quarter and a collectible quarter can sometimes be incredibly small, which is why experienced collectors never rely on appearance alone. And now we're ready to begin the countdown. Coin number 1 is the 1979 D Washington quarter. Get your coin, turn on the light, grab your magnifying glass, and let's examine exactly what collectors should look for, because the next few minutes could change the way you look at your pocket change forever. This is Ancient Coin World US, where every coin has a story, and sometimes the smallest details reveal the biggest surprises. Coin number 1, 1969 D Washington quarter. Welcome back to Ancient Coin World US. Today, we begin our exciting search for remarkable Washington quarter dollars, and our first coin is the 1969 D Washington quarter. At first glance, this coin may look like nothing more than an ordinary 25-cent piece that has spent decades traveling through pockets, cash registers, vending machines, and coin jars. But when you turn that little piece of metal over in your hand and examine the tiny details, you may discover that there is much more to its story. The D Mint mark tells us that this quarter was struck at the Denver Mint, and the 1969 issue belongs to an important period in American coinage when the traditional silver composition had already been replaced for regular circulation. So before we call this coin rare or valuable, let's uncover exactly what makes certain examples interesting to collectors. The first shocking fact about this coin is that a normal 1969 D Washington quarter is not a 90% silver quarter. Regular US circulation quarters dated 1965 and later were made with a copper core surrounded by copper-nickel layers, according to PCGS. The 90% silver Washington quarter era ended with the 1964 issues. That means the shiny appearance of a 1969 D quarter should not automatically convince you that you've discovered a silver coin. This distinction is extremely important because many online videos and advertisements describe older-looking quarters as silver simply because of their color or age. A serious collector looks at the date, composition, minting characteristics, and authentication rather than relying on appearance alone. Now let's focus on that tiny D Mint mark. The letter D represents the Denver Mint, and on this Washington quarter, it is one of the first details a collector should check. The 1969 D issue had a substantial production run, with PCGS documenting a mintage of 114,372,000 pieces. With that many coins produced, an ordinary circulated example is not automatically an ultra-rare treasure. But here's where the story becomes much more interesting. Specialists have identified 1969 DD repunched mint mark varieties, including FS501 and FS502. These varieties give collectors a specific feature to search for rather than simply assuming that every 1969 D quarter is valuable. Imagine finding an old quarter in a dusty drawer, a forgotten jar, or a family collection. It is dark, scratched, and covered with years of grime. Most people would probably toss it into a pile of ordinary change without giving it another thought. But a collector may stop and say, "Wait a minute, what year is this?" That simple question can completely change the way you look at the coin. The first step is always identification. You need to know the date, mint mark, and basic type before you can investigate whether the coin has anything unusual about it. The 1969 D Washington quarter features the familiar portrait of George Washington on the obverse, created by designer John Flanagan, while the reverse carries the traditional eagle design used on Washington quarters during this period. The design may look familiar to almost every American, but that familiarity is part of what makes these coins fascinating. They were not created merely as collectibles, they were intended to circulate in everyday commerce. That means countless examples experienced years of handling, producing the worn and sometimes dirty appearance that collectors encounter today. And now comes one of the most important questions. What is a normal 1969 D quarter worth? Current NGC information gives circulated 1969 D quarters a general range of roughly 30 cents to 85 cents, while exceptional uncirculated examples can be worth considerably more. NGC notes that pristine 1969 D quarters have reached prices as high as $2,600 on the open market. Those numbers demonstrate something important. Value depends enormously on condition and quality. You cannot look at an ordinary worn quarter and automatically assign it a four-figure price simply because it says 1969 D. This is where the phrase "condition is king" becomes important in coin collecting. A heavily circulated quarter may have scratches across Washington's portrait, worn lettering, flattened details, and marks from decades of use. An uncirculated coin, on the other hand, may still have sharp details, original luster, and relatively clean surfaces. Two coins with the exact same date and mint mark can therefore have dramatically different collector values. When professionals evaluate coins, they consider factors such as wear, surface preservation, luster, strike quality, and overall eye appeal. Now take a close look at the coin's color. You might see a bright silver-looking surface, a gray tone, a golden shade, or even areas of brown and darker discoloration. But remember, color alone does not prove silver content. Environmental exposure, storage conditions, chemicals, and natural tunning can alter the appearance of a clad coin. A quarter that looks unusually shiny might simply have been polished or exposed to a particular environment. Conversely, a darker coin might still preserve important original details underneath its aged surface. This brings us to another major warning for anyone searching through old coins. Do not clean your potentially collectible quarter. You might think that scrubbing away the dirt will make the coin more attractive, but collectors generally prefer original surfaces. Abrasive cleaning can leave fine scratches that are impossible to remove and can significantly hurt the coin's desirability. Even harsh chemical cleaning can change the surface in ways that experienced collectors immediately recognize. If your 1969 D quarter appears dirty but potentially interesting, leave it alone and examine it carefully in its original condition. The word dirty can actually be misleading when discussing old coins. Sometimes what looks like dirt is natural tunning, oxidation, or simply the result of decades of storage. A coin can develop fascinating shades as its surface interacts with its environment. Some collectors appreciate attractive natural tunning because it gives the coin character and documents its long journey through time. But artificial coloring or chemical damage is a completely different matter. The important thing is not whether a coin looks shiny, it is whether its surface remains authentic and undisturbed. Now let's talk about the feature that makes the 1969 D especially interesting to variety collectors: the repunched mint mark. PCGS recognizes two 1969 D varieties, FS501 and FS502. A repunched mint mark occurs when a mint mark was punched into the die more than once in slightly different positions, leaving evidence of the earlier punch. On a coin this small, those details can be extremely subtle. What looks like a strange shape or extra line to an inexperienced observer may require magnification and comparison with reference images before it can be identified confidently. This is why a simple magnifying glass can become a collector's best friend. Hold the quarter under good lighting and examine the mint mark area carefully. Do not immediately assume that every unusual-looking D is a repunched mint mark. Damage, scratches, die wear, corrosion, and post-mint alterations can create shapes that resemble errors. A legitimate variety should match known characteristics documented by specialists. In other words, the goal isn't to find something that merely looks strange. The goal is to find something that can be correctly identified. And here's where the treasure hunting adventure becomes exciting. Imagine you're searching through a box of old quarters, and suddenly you find a 1969 D. You turn it under the light and notice something unusual around the mint mark. Your heart starts beating faster. Could this be a recognized variety? Could it be an important error? Or is it simply damage caused after the coin left the mint? That moment of uncertainty is exactly what makes coin collecting so addictive. You investigate, compare, research, and learn. Another factor that can dramatically influence value is grade. Professional grading companies examine coins and assign standardized grades based on their condition. A coin that has never circulated can receive an uncirculated grade, while heavily worn examples receive much lower grades. The highest quality coins are scarce because they must have survived decades without significant contact marks or wear. NGC's current information illustrates just how large the difference can be between circulated and pristine 1969 D examples. So if you have a 1969 D quarter that looks unusually clean and sharp, don't immediately spend it. Compare it carefully with other quarters. Look at Washington's hair, cheek, and jawline. Examine the lettering and the rims. Check the eagle and surrounding fields on the reverse. Look for contact marks, scratches, discoloration, and unusual striking characteristics. If the coin appears genuinely exceptional, professional evaluation may be worthwhile. The edge is another useful area to inspect. Washington quarters have a reeded edge, meaning the edge contains a series of raised lines. Comparing the edge with a normal quarter can sometimes help reveal unusual characteristics, but remember that a strange-looking edge can also result from damage after the coin entered circulation. No single visual feature should be used to declare a coin rare. The strongest identification comes from combining several observations. There is also a common misconception that an old quarter automatically becomes more valuable simply because it has survived for decades. Age alone is not enough. The United States produced enormous quantities of many coins, and millions of examples can survive today. What collectors really want is scarcity combined with demand. A rare variety in excellent condition can be highly desirable, while an old but extremely common circulated coin may remain inexpensive. The same principle applies to claims about thousands or millions of dollars. Yes, rare American coins have achieved extraordinary prices, but that does not mean every old Washington quarter is secretly worth a fortune. A responsible collector should always ask for evidence. Is the variety recognized? Has the coin been authenticated? What grade did it receive? Have comparable examples actually sold for that amount? These questions protect collectors from exaggerated online claims and unrealistic price expectations. For investors, this distinction is especially important. Collecting and investing are not the same thing. A coin's value can depend on condition, rarity, demand, certification, auction results, and market trends. A dramatic price displayed on an online listing is simply an asking price. It does not necessarily mean someone has actually paid that amount. Genuine auction records and reputable price guides provide much stronger evidence when researching a coin. Now imagine that your 1969 D quarter is dirty and worn. Should you throw it away? Absolutely not without checking it. It may still be a perfectly legitimate collectible, and if you notice an unusual variety, the dirt could be hiding important details. But remember the golden rule: don't scrub it. Photograph it, preserve it safely, and compare it with reliable references. If necessary, ask a professional for an opinion. Perhaps the most fascinating part of the 1969 D story is how such a small coin connects us to a major period in American history. This quarter was produced during a time of enormous social, technological, and cultural change. The United States was entering a new era, and everyday objects like coins quietly recorded that period. Every time you hold a 1969 D quarter, you're holding an artifact from that moment in American history. And the design itself deserves appreciation. George Washington's portrait is instantly recognizable, while the eagle on the reverse represents strength and national identity. These images were carried by millions of Americans through ordinary moments, buying food, paying for transportation, using vending machines, or simply saving loose change. Most people never stop to think about the history in their hands. Collectors do. Now let's return to the 1969 DD repunched mint mark varieties, because this is where today's treasure hunt becomes more precise. PCGS identifies FS501 and FS502 as recognized varieties and documents an auction record of $237 for an MS66 FS5, one example in 2018. Notice how different this is from sensational claims of automatic 5 or 6-figure values. The real story is actually more interesting. A relatively ordinary quarter can become collectible when it possesses a documented variety and exceptional quality. That example also teaches us an important lesson about coin values. Rarity is only one part of the equation. A rare coin that nobody wants may not command a huge price, while a recognized variety with strong collector demand can attract competition. Condition adds another layer. Certification adds another. Provenance and auction history can add even more credibility. Coin value is therefore a combination of factors rather than one magical number. So if you're watching this video while holding a 1969 D Washington quarter, take a moment before you put it back into your pocket. Look carefully at the mint mark. Examine it under magnification. Compare the shape and position of the D with trusted references for the known 1969 DD varieties. Then inspect the rest of the coin for unusual characteristics. And if your coin appears exceptionally well preserved, consider professional grading rather than relying on a random online valuation. Most importantly, remember that not every unusual-looking coin is an error. Post-mint damage is extremely common. A coin can become bent, scratched, stained, chemically altered, or struck by machinery after leaving the mint. These conditions can create dramatic-looking marks that have little numismatic value. Learning the difference between a genuine mint-made characteristic and damage is one of the most important skills you can develop as a collector. So what should you do if you think you've discovered something special? First, don't clean it. Second, don't sell it immediately based on an internet comment. Third, photograph both sides clearly and preserve the coin in a suitable holder. Fourth, compare it with reputable numismatic references. And finally, if the evidence suggests a genuine variety or exceptional grade, consider having the coin examined by a recognized professional grading service. And now the big question: is the 1969 D Washington quarter a silver coin worth a fortune? For a normal circulation example, the answer is no. Regular 1969 D quarters are clad, not the 90% silver quarters of the earlier era. But that doesn't make the coin boring. Its recognized repunchment mark varieties, high-grade examples, historical importance, and potential for discovery make it a fascinating piece for collectors. That is the real lesson behind today's first coin. The treasure isn't always obvious. Sometimes it isn't a glittering silver coin or a mysterious piece worth millions. Sometimes it's a tiny mint mark detail that requires a magnifying glass to see. Sometimes it's an unusually high-grade survivor that escaped decades of circulation. And sometimes the greatest value is simply discovering a piece of American history that you might otherwise have ignored. So before you spend that old quarter, stop and look twice. Check the year, find the mint mark, study the surfaces, examine the color, inspect the edge, search for legitimate varieties, and above all, protect the coin rather than cleaning it. You may not be holding $1 million treasure, but you could be holding a fascinating collectible with a story worth telling. This is Ancient Coin World US, and our journey through America's hidden coin treasures has only just begun. The 1969 D. Washington quarter shows us that even a common-looking clad coin can become interesting when you know what to search for. So keep your eyes open, keep your old coins safe, and never underestimate the tiny details stamped into American currency. Because sometimes, the difference between ordinary pocket change and a collector's treasure is just one tiny mark, and you might already have one sitting next up. Coin number 3, 1983p Washington Quarter. Welcome back to Ancient Coin World US. We have reached the third and final coin in today's Washington Quarter journey, and this time we're examining a date that has become particularly interesting to collectors because of its high-grade examples and recognized varieties, the 1983p Washington Quarter. At first glance, it may look like an ordinary 25-cent coin, perhaps scratched, dirty, dull, or forgotten in an old container. But this particular date has a story that deserves a much closer look. The Philadelphia P mint mark tells us where it was produced, and although millions were struck, exceptional examples and genuine varieties can command substantially more than face value. So before you throw that old 1983p quarter back into your change jar, let's discover why collectors pay such close attention to this coin. The first thing we need to establish is something extremely important about the word silver. A normal 1983p Washington quarter is not a 90% silver quarter. PCGS lists its composition as 75% copper and 25% nickel over pure copper center, with a weight of 5.67 grams and a diameter of 24.3 millimeters. PCGS.com. So if you have a 1983p quarter that looks bright gray or silver colored, don't automatically assume it is made of silver. Its appearance can be affected by lighting, circulation, storage, tunning, or other environmental factors. Correct identification always comes before a value estimate. The P Mint mark is another important clue. It tells collectors that the coin was produced at the Philadelphia Mint. PCGS records a mintage of approximately 673,535,000 regular strike 1983p quarters. PCGS.com. That huge production number means an ordinary circulated example isn't automatically rare. But here's where the story becomes much more interesting. Despite the enormous mintage, truly exceptional examples in very high grades are considerably more interesting to collectors. This is one reason the 1983p has developed a reputation among specialists as a coin worth examining carefully. Now imagine finding one of these quarters in an old jar. It has a dark surface, perhaps some dirt around the lettering, scratches across the fields, and years of wear around Washington's portrait. You might immediately think it's only a quarter, but a collector sees something different. The date says 1983, the mint mark says P, and now the investigation begins. Is it circulated or uncirculated? Does it have original luster? Are there unusual marks? Could it have a recognized variety? Is the apparent damage actually a mint-made characteristic? These questions can completely change the story of an ordinary-looking coin. The 1983p belongs to the familiar Washington quarter design, created by John Flanagan. The obverse features George Washington, while the reverse carries the eagle design used during this period. The design had become deeply familiar to Americans by the early 1980s, and millions of these coins moved through everyday commerce. People used them to buy food, pay for services, operate vending machines, and make ordinary purchases. Almost nobody using one in 1983 could have imagined that decades later collectors would examine the coin under powerful magnification. Now let's talk about condition, because this is where the 1983p becomes particularly fascinating. NGC's current price guide lists circulated 1983p quarters at approximately 30 cents to 85 cents, while its guide shows substantially higher values for exceptional uncirculated grades, reaching about $1,300 at MS67. NGCcoin.com. This enormous difference illustrates the importance of preservation. A normal worn quarter and an exceptionally preserved specimen may have exactly the same date and mint mark, but their collector values can be dramatically different. PCGS auction records make the story even more exciting. A certified 1983p MS67 example sold for $2,538 in 2013, while another MS-67 example sold for $1,410 in 2014. PCGS.com. These are real historical auction results for specifically graded coins, not a claim that every 1983 p-quarter is worth thousands. This distinction is extremely important for our viewers because online coin videos sometimes take the highest auction result and present it as though it applies to every example of the date. And that's why the phrase, most valuable 1983 p-quarter, should always be followed by another question: what grade and what variety? A circulated coin might be worth very little above face value, while a certified coin in an extraordinary grade can bring hundreds or thousands of dollars. The individual characteristics of the coin matter far more than simply seeing the date 1983, and the letter P. Now let's discuss the famous variety associated with this date. PCGS recognizes the 1983 PFS9, a one spitting eagle variety. PCGS.com. The nickname comes from a distinctive die characteristic involving the eagle on the reverse. This is exactly the kind of feature that can transform a normal-looking quarter into an interesting variety for specialists. But remember, the variety needs to be correctly identified. Not every mark near the eagle represents the recognized spitting eagle variety. The documented auction record for the PCGS-listed 1983 PFS9, one spitting eagle, is $504 for an MS-66 Plus example sold by Heritage Auctions in 2018. PCGS.com. Notice again how specific the result is. The value is attached to a particular variety and grade. It does not mean that every 1983 p-quarter with a strange-looking eagle is automatically worth $500. Accurate identification is the key. There is another fascinating example of how mint errors can change the value. PCGS records a 1983 p-quarter struck 40% off center and graded MS-65 by NGC that sold for $384 in a 2024 Stack's Bowers auction. PCGS.com. An off-center strike like this is dramatically different from ordinary post-mint damage because the unusual positioning occurred during the minting process. This is exactly why genuine mint errors can be much more interesting than random scratches acquired during circulation. So if you have a dirty 1983 p-quarter, don't immediately clean it. That dirt could be hiding details that you need to examine, and cleaning can permanently damage the surface. Collectors generally prefer original surfaces over coins that have been polished or chemically treated. A shiny coin is not automatically a valuable coin, and an old-looking coin isn't automatically worthless. Sometimes the natural, untouched surface is exactly what a collector wants to preserve. Look carefully at the reverse eagle. Use good lighting and magnification. Compare your coin with photographs of authenticated 1983 p varieties. The goal is not simply to find something that looks unusual. The goal is to determine whether what you see matches a documented variety or genuine mint error. This is the difference between serious numismatic research and guessing. Now examine the date and p-mint mark. Make sure the coin really is a 1983 p and not a different year or mint. The mint mark should be examined carefully for signs of damage or unusual characteristics, but don't assume every strange-looking letter is a mint error. A coin can acquire scratches, dents, corrosion, or other damage after leaving the mint, and these post-mint marks can sometimes look surprisingly convincing. The edge is also worth checking. The Washington quarter has a reeded edge, and the regular 1983 p weighs about 5.67 grams. PCGS.com. If you suspect that your coin might be struck on an unusual planchet or have an abnormal composition, weight and physical examination can provide useful clues. But home measurements should be considered preliminary, not final authentication. This is especially important because some people see a quarter that appears unusually bright or grey and immediately call it a silver quarter. Don't make that mistake. The standard 1983 p issue is copper-nickel clad, not 90% silver. NGC coin.com. If you suspect an unusual composition, the coin needs proper professional testing rather than a visual guess. Color is another fascinating part of old coin collecting. A 1983 p quarter can develop grey, brown, golden, or other shades depending on its environment and storage history. Some coins may appear almost silver-white under bright light, while others can become darker and more subdued. These color differences can be interesting, but they should never be used by themselves to establish rarity or precious metal content. And if your quarter is dirty, don't panic. Dirt does not automatically mean the coin has no value. It also doesn't automatically mean the coin is rare. What matters is what lies underneath and whether the surfaces have been damaged. If you believe you have a potentially valuable variety, leave the coin untouched and preserve it carefully until you can compare it with trusted references or have it examined professionally. Now let's talk about one of the biggest myths in the coin world. This coin is worth millions because it's old. The 1983 p quarter is more than 40 years old, but age alone doesn't make it $1 million coin. Millions were produced. The extraordinary prices documented for this issue are associated with exceptional grades or specific varieties and errors. PCGS and NGC records provide a much more realistic picture than sensational headlines. PCGS, the same time, we shouldn't underestimate the coin either. The 1983p has demonstrated that an ordinary-looking quarter can become a serious collectible when the right combination of rarity, condition, and demand comes together. PCGS has documented multiple high-grade auction results, including four-figure results for MS67 examples. PCGS, that makes this date especially interesting for anyone searching through old collections. For collectors, the MS67 level is where the story becomes particularly dramatic. A coin at that level must have exceptional preservation, and tiny marks that would be ignored on a circulated quarter can become important when evaluating an uncirculated coin. The difference between a good-looking coin and a truly elite coin can be extremely subtle. That's why professional grading becomes useful when a coin appears to have serious high-grade potential. Imagine finding a 1983p that looks almost untouched. The surfaces still sparkle under the light, the details are sharp, and there are very few contact marks. You compare it with another 1983p that has spent decades circulating, and suddenly the difference becomes obvious. The first coin may be a candidate for professional evaluation, while the second is simply an interesting old quarter. Same date, same mint, completely different collector appeal. This is one reason coin collecting can feel like detective work. You aren't simply searching for old dates. You're learning how coins were made, how they circulated, how they changed with age, and how collectors determine condition. You begin to recognize what normal wear looks like, and what an actual mint-made characteristic looks like. Every coin you examine improves your knowledge. The 1983p also demonstrates why auction records matter. For example, PCGS records a 1983p MS66 example selling for $125 in 2022, while another MS66 example sold for $41 in 2018. PCGS, prices can therefore vary considerably depending on the exact coin, grade, certification, venue, and market conditions. A price guide is useful, but actual sales provide additional context. So if you're searching for this coin as a collector or investor, don't focus only on the biggest number you see online. Look at the specific grade, variety, certification, and documented sale. A $15,000 plus auction record for a particular high-grade coin does not mean a dirty circulated example in your pocket is worth $15,000. PCGS records a $15,862.50 auction result for a 1983p MS65 example, showing how unusual individual auction outcomes can be, but again, that is for a specific certified coin. PCGS, for someone holding an ordinary circulated 1983p, the realistic expectation is much more modest. NGC currently lists circulated examples around 30 to 85 cents, depending on condition. NGC coin, that may not sound spectacular, but remember that the real excitement comes when your coin has something that separates it from the ordinary examples. That's when research becomes essential. So before you spend your 1983p Washington quarter, take a moment to inspect it. Check the date, confirm the P-mint mark, examine the reverse eagle, look for the recognized spitting eagle characteristics, inspect the surfaces for genuine mint errors, and evaluate the overall condition. If the coin is unusually sharp, uncirculated, or appears to have a legitimate variety or error, protect it and consider professional evaluation. And whatever you do, don't clean it. Don't use vinegar, jewelry cleaner, baking soda, abrasive polish, or a rough cloth. Those methods may make the coin appear brighter, but they can destroy the original surface that collectors value. If the coin is truly interesting, preserving its original condition is much more important than making it look shiny. So is the 1983p Washington quarter a silver coin worth millions? No, not as a normal circulation issue, but is it a coin worth checking? Absolutely. Its high-grade auction history, recognized spitting eagle variety, and documented mint error examples make it one of the more intriguing Washington quarters from this period. PCGS, that brings us to the end of today's third coin. From the 1969D to the 1981D, and now the 1983p, we've seen an important lesson. The date and mint mark are only the beginning. A coin's composition, condition, variety, error status, and authentication can completely change the story. Some coins will remain ordinary pocket change, while others can become highly desirable collectibles. This is Ancient Coin World US, where every old coin has a story and every tiny detail could be the beginning of a discovery. So the next time you find an old Washington quarter sitting in a drawer, coin jar, or pocket, don't spend it without looking twice. Turn it over, study the details, check the date and mint mark, and protect anything that looks genuinely unusual. You may not have $1 million treasure, but you might have something much more interesting than you first imagined. Next up, Coin number 4, 1984 D Washington Quarter. Welcome back to Ancient Coin World US. Today, we have reached another fascinating chapter in our journey through American coin treasures, and this time we are taking a very close look at the 1984 D Washington Quarter dollar, a coin that may appear completely ordinary at first glance, but can become surprisingly interesting when you examine its condition, surfaces, mint mark, and overall quality. Perhaps you have one sitting inside an old coin jar, a drawer, a family collection, or even mixed together with modern pocket change. Maybe the coin is dirty, dark, scratched, or has an unusual color that makes you wonder whether it could be silver. Before you spend it, however, stop for a moment and look carefully, because the story behind this little quarter is much more interesting than its 25-cent face value might suggest. The first and most important fact we need to establish is about silver. A normal 1984 D Washington quarter is not a 90% silver quarter. According to NGC, the regular 1984 D issue is made from copper-nickel-clad copper, weighs approximately 5.67 grams, measures 24.3 millimeters across, and has a reeded edge. So if your 1984 D quarter looks silver-colored, bright gray, or unusually shiny, that appearance alone does not prove that the coin contains silver. The famous 90% silver Washington quarter series ended with earlier issues, while regular circulation quarters from this period were made from clad metal. This distinction is extremely important when researching the value of an old quarter, because a coin's date and appearance cannot replace proper identification of its composition. Now let's look at the tiny D mint mark, because that little letter tells us where this coin was produced. The D indicates the Denver Mint, and that information is an essential part of identifying the coin. NGC confirms that the 1984 D Washington quarter is a Denver issue. When collectors examine a quarter, they don't simply look at the year. They look at the year, the mint mark, the condition, the design details, and any unusual characteristics. A small difference in one of these areas can sometimes turn an ordinary-looking coin into a much more interesting collectible. Now imagine that you discover a 1984 D quarter covered in dirt. Perhaps it has been sitting inside an old container for decades, and its surface looks dark and unattractive. Many people would immediately assume that a dirty quarter is worthless, but experienced collectors know that appearance alone can be misleading. Dirt, tunning, oxidation, and environmental exposure can change the way a coin looks over time. At the same time, scratches, dents, chemical damage, and cleaning can also affect its surface. That's why the first rule of today's treasure hunt is simple: don't clean the coin before you know what you have. A dirty coin can sometimes contain important details that deserve closer examination. Under good lighting and magnification, you can study Washington's portrait, the lettering, the date, the mint mark, the rim, and the reverse eagle. You may discover that what initially looked like ordinary discoloration is simply natural tunning or environmental change. Or perhaps you'll discover scratches and contact marks showing that the coin circulated heavily. Either way, examination is more useful than guessing. The goal is not to make the coin shiny. The goal is to understand exactly what the coin is and whether anything about it separates it from millions of ordinary examples. The 1984 D Washington quarter belongs to a fascinating period of American coinage. The familiar Washington portrait appeared on the obverse, while the reverse carried the eagle design that had been used on Washington quarters for decades. These coins were designed for everyday commerce, not primarily as collectibles. They passed through countless hands, cash registers, vending machines, banks, and pockets. Every time one was dropped, rubbed against another coin, or placed on a hard surface, its condition could change. That's why finding a truly pristine example decades later can be much more interesting than finding a heavily circulated example. And now we come to the question everyone wants answered: how much is a 1984 D Washington quarter worth? The answer depends heavily on condition. NGC's current guide shows circulated examples around 30 cents to 85 cents, while its guide reaches approximately $550 for an exceptionally high-grade example. This difference is enormous compared with the coin's 25-cent face value, but it also shows why we cannot simply say that every 1984 D quarter is valuable. Most examples are ordinary circulation coins. The real collector interest appears when an individual coin has exceptional preservation, unusual characteristics, or another feature that gives it additional desirability. This is where condition becomes the star of the story. Think about two 1984 D quarters sitting side by side. One has been circulating for more than 40 years, with scratches across Washington's portrait, worn surfaces, dull luster, and marks around the rims. The other appears almost untouched, with sharp details, strong original luster, and very few contact marks. Both have the same date and mint mark, but their collector appeal can be dramatically different. The second coin may be worth examining much more carefully, because high-grade survivors are far more interesting to collectors than ordinary worn examples. Professional grading can become especially important when dealing with coins like this. A grading service evaluates the condition and assigns a standardized grade. At the highest levels, tiny imperfections can make an enormous difference. A coin that looks perfect to the naked eye might reveal small contact marks under magnification, while another coin may have exceptional surfaces that stand out among thousands of ordinary examples. This is one reason professional certification can be useful when a coin appears to have genuine high-grade potential. But don't make the mistake of seeing a high auction result and assuming that every 1984 D quarter is worth hundreds of dollars. The NGC Guide's approximately $550 figure applies to very high-grade examples, not an average dirty coin from circulation. This is a crucial point for anyone making a coin collecting video, because online headlines can sometimes make ordinary coins sound like guaranteed fortunes. The truth is much more interesting. The individual characteristics of the specific coin determine whether it deserves further attention. Now let's talk about color, because this is one of the most exciting things people notice when searching old quarters. A 1984 D quarter might appear bright silver, gray, brownish, golden, or even display unusual shades across its surface. But color does not automatically identify the metal. A clad quarter can develop different appearances because of storage conditions, environmental exposure, tunning, oxidation, and other factors. A coin that looks silver may still be copper nickel clad. Therefore, never tell viewers that a strange color proves the coin is made of silver unless its composition has been properly verified. Natural tunning can sometimes create beautiful and unusual appearances. You may notice darker areas near the edges, subtle golden tones around the lettering, or gray shades across the fields. Collectors sometimes appreciate attractive natural tunning because it can demonstrate the coin's age and storage history. But there is a major difference between natural tunning and artificial coloring. Chemical treatments can permanently change a coin's surface, and collectors may recognize such alterations immediately. So if your 1984 D quarter has an unusual color, don't experiment with chemicals. Preserve it and investigate it first. Now let's examine the mint mark more closely. The D is one of the first things you should confirm when identifying this coin. A clear D beneath the date tells you that you're looking at the Denver issue. But don't assume that every unusual-looking D represents an error. The coin may have suffered damage after leaving the mint, or the surface may simply be worn. Genuine mint errors and varieties require careful comparison with documented examples, and this is where serious coin research becomes much more valuable than guesswork. Take your magnifying glass and examine the date. Look at the numbers individually. Check whether the design elements appear normal. Then move your attention to the D-mint mark and the surrounding field. After that, inspect Washington's portrait and the reverse eagle. You're searching for something that looks genuinely unusual, and ideally something that can be matched to a recognized variety or mint error. The key word here is recognized. A random scratch may look dramatic, but if it happened after the coin left the mint, it usually isn't a valuable mint error. The reverse of the Washington quarter is especially interesting because the eagle provides many small design details that can be studied under magnification. Look at the wings, feathers, lettering, and surrounding fields. If you discover unusual doubling, die cracks, off-center striking, or another potential mint-made feature, take photographs and compare them with reputable numismatic references. Don't immediately announce that you've discovered an ultra-rare coin. First, determine whether the feature is actually known and whether experts recognize it as a legitimate variety or error. One of the most important distinctions in coin collecting is the difference between mint damage and post-mint damage. Suppose you see a deep line running across Washington's portrait. It may look like an error, but if the line was caused by another coin or a machine after the quarter entered circulation, it is simply damage. Likewise, a dent around the rim may have occurred when the coin was dropped. A genuine mint error occurs during production, and its characteristics often have patterns that can be studied and verified. Now let's talk about cleaning, because this is where many potentially interesting coins are accidentally damaged. If your 1984 D quarter is dirty, don't use a polishing cloth. Don't scrub it with baking soda. Don't put it in vinegar. Don't use jewelry cleaner. Don't scrape the surface with a sharp object. These methods can leave scratches, remove original surfaces, or create unnatural appearances. A collector would generally rather examine an original, untouched coin than a shiny coin whose surface has been permanently altered by cleaning. If the coin is dirty but appears to have strong details, simply handle it carefully by the edges. Place it in a protective holder and inspect it under good lighting. You can photograph both sides for research without changing the coin. This allows you to compare it with known examples while preserving its original state. If the coin appears unusually valuable, professional evaluation is much safer than experimenting with household cleaning methods. Another fascinating question is whether 1984D quarter can be ultra-rare. The answer requires nuance. A normal 1984D circulation quarter is not automatically ultra-rare, and the date itself does not guarantee a huge value. But an individual coin can become much more desirable if it has extraordinary grade, a legitimate mint era, or a recognized variety. That distinction is the heart of responsible coin collecting. Instead of saying, every 1984D is rare, we should say, some individual 1984D examples may be significantly more collectible depending on their characteristics. This is also why the phrase, worth thousands or millions, should be treated cautiously. Extraordinary American coins have sold for extraordinary prices, but a normal 1984D quarter is not automatically worth anything close to that. NGC's current guide provides a much more realistic range, from around 30 cents for low-grade examples to hundreds of dollars for the finest listed grades. If someone claims your dirty 1984D quarter is worth a fortune, ask for specific evidence before believing the claim. For investors and collectors, one of the strongest pieces of evidence is an actual auction record. A recorded sale shows what someone actually paid for a particular coin under specific circumstances. That's much stronger evidence than an online seller listing a coin for an enormous amount and hoping someone will buy it. When researching your own quarter, compare your coin's condition and characteristics with actual sales of similar coins. The closer the comparison, the more useful the information becomes. The 1984D quarter also has a fascinating connection to American history. This was the era of the 1984 Los Angeles Olympic Games, and the United States Mint produced special Olympic commemorative coins during that period, including a separate 1984D Olympic silver dollar. PCGS identifies that commemorative as a 90% silver dollar, but it is a completely different coin from the regular 1984D Washington quarter. This is an important distinction because someone might see 1984D silver online and mistakenly think it refers to the Washington quarter. It doesn't. The Olympic silver dollar is a different denomination and design. That historical connection makes the year 1984 especially interesting. America was celebrating the Olympic Games in Los Angeles, while ordinary Washington quarters continued moving through everyday commerce. At the same time, the Mint was producing special commemorative coins for collectors. So when you see the year 1984 on a US coin, remember that there may be several completely different issues from that year. The denomination, design, mint mark, and composition must all be considered before identifying what you actually have. Now let's imagine the most exciting scenario. You find a 1984D quarter that looks almost untouched. It has strong luster, sharp lettering, clean fields, and remarkably few contact marks. You compare it with several ordinary circulated examples, and the difference is obvious. This is the kind of coin that deserves additional attention. NGC's current guide indicates that the finest listed examples can reach hundreds of dollars, illustrating how much exceptional condition can matter. But what if your quarter is the opposite, dark, dirty, scratched and worn? Don't be disappointed. It may not be worth much above face value, but it still represents a fascinating piece of American history. More importantly, examining ordinary examples helps you learn what normal wear looks like. Once you have studied hundreds of common coins, you'll become much better at recognizing the truly unusual ones. This is why coin collecting is sometimes described as a form of detective work. You begin with a date and mint mark, then examine the physical evidence. You compare the coin with reference examples. You investigate possible varieties. You consider the grade. You research auction results. And finally, you decide whether the coin deserves professional authentication. Every step teaches you something new about the history and production of American currency. Another important point is weight and composition. NGC lists the regular 1984D quarter at 5.67 grams and identifies it as copper-nickel-clad copper. If your coin seems significantly different in weight, appearance, or edge structure, that could justify additional investigation. But home measurements are only preliminary. A kitchen scale isn't enough to prove a rare planchet error or unusual composition. If something truly unusual appears, professional examination is the safest path. So what should you do if you believe you have an unusual 1984D quarter? First, don't clean it. Second, handle it only by the edges. Third, photograph both sides clearly. Fourth, examine the date, mint mark, rim, edge, and major design elements. Fifth, compare your coin with trusted numismatic references. And finally, if the evidence suggests an exceptional grade, recognized variety, or genuine mint error, consider professional authentication. And now we reach the most important conclusion about today's coin. The 1984 D Washington quarter is not a regular 90% silver quarter, despite what its color or age might suggest. NGC identifies the normal issue as copper-nickel-clad copper, but that doesn't make the coin uninteresting. Its high-grade examples can be worth substantially more than face value, and its history connects us to an important era of American coin production. So before you spend that old 1984 D quarter, stop for just a few seconds, turn it over, look at Washington's portrait, examine the date, find the D mint mark, study the eagle, check the surfaces, look at the edge, ask yourself whether the coin is heavily circulated or remarkably preserved. If you see something genuinely unusual, don't rush to clean or sell it. Preserve it, research it, and get professional advice if necessary. And remember, not every old or dirty quarter is a hidden fortune. Most will remain ordinary coins, and that's perfectly normal. The excitement comes from discovering the exceptions, the high-grade survivor, the legitimate mint error, the recognized variety, or the unusual coin that tells a story far beyond its face value. That's what makes searching through old coins so fascinating. The greatest lesson from our Washington quarter journey is that knowledge is more valuable than hype. A dramatic headline might tell you that an old quarter is worth millions, but a serious collector asks for evidence. What is the composition? What is the exact date and mint mark? What grade is it? Is the variety recognized? Has a comparable coin actually sold for the claimed amount? Those questions separate responsible coin collecting from internet rumors. So if you're holding a 1984 D Washington quarter right now, take a closer look before spending it. It may be an ordinary clad quarter worth little more than face value, or it may be an unusually well-preserved example worthy of further research. NGC's current data shows just how dramatically the value can change as condition improves, with its guide ranging from about 30 cents in low grades to around $550 at the top listed level. That's the kind of difference that makes careful examination worthwhile. And this brings us to the end of today's Washington quarter adventure here on Ancient Coin World US. We started with the fascinating 1969 D, moved through the 1981 D and 1983 P, and now we've reached the 1984 D. Each coin taught us the same powerful lesson. Don't judge a coin only by its age, color, or appearance. Look at the date, mint mark, composition, condition, varieties, and genuine errors. Because sometimes the most interesting discovery isn't the coin everyone claims is worth millions. It's the ordinary-looking coin that contains one tiny detail you almost missed. So keep searching those old coin jars, family collections, drawers, and pockets. Keep learning, keep your magnifying glass ready, and most importantly, never clean a potentially valuable coin before you know what you have. Here at Ancient Coin World US, we believe every coin has a story, every mint mark has a meaning, and every small detail can lead to a fascinating discovery. Until our next treasure hunt, keep your eyes open, keep your old coins safe, and remember, the next ordinary-looking quarter you find could be the one that makes you stop, look twice, and discover a piece of American history hiding right in your hands. See you in the next video.